My name is Thomas Hale. I'm a lighthouse keeper. That's what the paperwork says anyway. Most people hear that and picture calm nights, the sound of waves, a steady light sweeping the water. They think my job is simple: keep the bulb burning, keep ships from crashing into the rocks. That's what I thought too. The lighthouse I work at doesn't show up on most maps. No tourists, no postcards. Just a tower of stone bolted into the edge of the ocean, hours from the nearest town, surrounded by water that never really sleeps. Out here, the sea isn't just water. It listens. And the light isn't meant to guide anyone home. I learned that on my first week, when the fog rolled in without warning, the radio went dead, and something in the water started moving toward the shore only when the beam was on. That's when I understood the truth. The light was never built to help ships see us. It was built to make sure we could see them coming, and to keep something far worse from ever reaching land. Lighthouse work attracts a certain kind of person. Men who don't ask questions. Men who don't mind being forgotten. That's what the old supervisor told me when I took the job. He slid the contract across the desk like he didn't want it touching him for too long. No smile. No small talk. Just a pen, a signature line, and a warning disguised as advice. The lighthouse was built in 1908, back when ships still trusted light more than instruments, and the sea claimed men faster than their families could learn their names. It stands on a slab of black rock clawing out of the ocean, miles from the nearest stretch of mainland. On a clear day, you can barely see the coast. On most days, you see nothing at all. Getting there takes hours. A supply boat when the weather allows it. A helicopter only in emergencies. Once you're dropped off, the ocean closes behind you like a door. My routine was simple. That was the lie that made it easy to accept. Wake before sunset. Inspect the lens. Clean salt from the glass. Check the generator. Log the weather. Log the beam rotation. Log the time the light comes on and the time it shuts off at dawn. The light itself is older than it looks. Thick glass, heavy metal housing, gears that hum like they're breathing. When it turns, you feel it through the soles of your boots. A slow, steady rotation that never quite lets you forget it's there. Every 2 or 3 weeks, a supply crate arrives. Canned food. Fuel. Bulbs I never actually replace. Letters addressed to current keeper. No return address. No signatures. Just reminders. Stay inside during heavy fog. Report all anomalies. Do not alter the light's rotation schedule. The locals don't like the lighthouse. They never said it outright, but you could hear it in the way they talked around it. Fishermen would lower their voices when the beam swept the water. Some wouldn't look at it at all when the fog rolled in. One old man at the dock told me, "Light like that ain't for helping people." When I asked what he meant, he spat into the water and walked away. No one stays in the job long. That's another thing they don't advertise. 6 months. A year if you're stubborn. The previous keeper lasted just under 8 months. No incident report. No cause listed. He simply resigned. But he didn't take everything with him. The first night I stayed over, I noticed the boots. Heavy rubber, salt-stained, still wet at the seams. They were lined up neatly by the door, toes pointing outward toward the ocean. Like someone had stepped out of them and never came back. I told myself he'd left them behind on purpose. Too bulky to carry. Too worn to matter. That explanation worked until I found the logbook. It was tucked into a cabinet behind the stairs, leather-bound and swollen with moisture. The first pages were routine. Dates, weather conditions, maintenance notes, all written in my handwriting. That should have been impossible. I flipped back through the entries, my pulse ticking up as the words matched the way I wrote my letters, the way I crossed my T's, the way I shortened certain words without thinking. But the dates were months before I arrived. The last entry was a single line. Fog came early tonight. I checked the window. Clear skies, calm water, no fog in sight. Then the fog bell rang. Once, long, low. The sound rolled up the rock and into the tower, vibrating through the walls. A warning meant for ships that weren't there. I rushed outside, heart pounding, expecting to see the sea swallowed whole. But the horizon was clean. Stars overhead. The bell was still swaying slightly, like it had been pushed by a hand I couldn't see. That was the moment I realized something was wrong, not broken, not malfunctioning, but wrong in a way that felt deliberate. The lighthouse was working exactly as it was meant to. I just didn't know who it was working for. Fog doesn't roll in here. It climbs, like it's pulling itself up the rocks. I learned that on the third night after I'd convinced myself. The bell incident was just old machinery and bad nerves. I'd made coffee. I'd tightened screws. I'd done every practical thing a working man does when he doesn't want to admit he's scared. The forecast radio said clear skies until morning. The ocean disagreed. At first, it looked harmless, just a thin gray ribbon hugging the waterline. Then it thickened, spreading across the black surface like spilled milk, crawling closer with a patience that didn't belong to weather. It didn't drift with the wind. It advanced in slow, deliberate waves, pressing itself into every crack of the shoreline. I stepped onto the catwalk to check the horizon. The air hit me like a damp cloth. Cold, but not the kind that comes from wind or rain. This cold felt intentional, like something trying to lower your body temperature without touching you. The metal rail beneath my hands turned slick instantly, beating with moisture that shouldn't have formed so fast. That's when I smelled it. Not salt, not seaweed. Something sharper, metallic, like pennies rubbed between wet fingers, like blood diluted in seawater. I told myself it was rust, old tower, old bolts, old pipes. That explanation lasted about 5 seconds. From below the rocks, somewhere in the fog, I heard a voice. My name, Thomas. Not shouted, not desperate. Spoken patiently, like someone calling a dog back to the porch. I froze with my fingers wrapped around the rail. The sound didn't echo the way voices do on open water. It didn't bounce. It didn't distort. It arrived clean and close, like it had been spoken from just behind my shoulder. I turned. Nothing. Just the lamp housing and the black circle of glass, and beyond it, the fog rising in slow layers, climbing the tower like it knew the route. I went inside and shut the door hard enough to make the hinges complain. Then I sat at the kitchen table and did what lonely people always do when the world starts to feel unreal. I made excuses.
stress,
new job, isolation. The brain filling silence with patterns. I'd read about it, how men on submarines and oil rigs start hearing things, seeing movement where there isn't any. How the mind hates emptiness so much it invents company. I repeated that logic until my hands stopped shaking. It almost worked. Almost. Because the voice came again the next night. And the next. Always from below the rocks. Always patient. Always using my name like it had owned it longer than I had. The fog started arriving early too, so early I stopped trusting forecasts altogether. On the mainland, they said visibility would be fine. Out here, the air would thicken an hour before sunset, squeezing the tower into a smaller and smaller world, until the light was the only thing that felt solid. Peopled. And the worst part was the way the fog behaved. It didn't just obscure. I can't explain that without sounding crazy, but you asked for the truth, so here it is. There's a difference between fog that drifts and fog that waits. This fog waited. It pressed against the glass like a curious face, always shifting, always adjusting, as if it was trying to find a gap you'd forgotten to seal. On the fifth night, I decided to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. I brought a flashlight, a rope, and a flare down to the lower landing near the rock path. I didn't go far. Rule 1 was already burned into me. Don't do anything that puts the light at risk. Fill seed. But I needed to know what was calling. The fog was thin down there. Not thick enough to hide a person. I found the book on the seventh night. Not because I went looking for answers, because I was still trying to live inside excuses. I was still telling myself. The bell was old hardware. The fog was bad weather. And the voice was my brain making noise in the silence. But the lighthouse has a way of dragging truth out of hiding. It started with the wall behind the stair cabinet. That cabinet always felt wrong, like it had been moved and put back in a hurry. The wood didn't match the rest of the interior, and the nails were too new for a tower built in 1908. I noticed it on day one, but I ignored it the way you ignore a crack in a ceiling when you're renting a cheap place. That night, the fog arrived early again. Not drifting climbing. The air turned damp and heavy, and the whole tower smelled like wet pennies. The bell didn't ring, but I felt something worse, a pressure in the silence, like the ocean itself was listening for my next move. I ran my hands along the cabinet frame and felt a seam. A thin gap where there shouldn't be one. I pulled. The wood resisted, then shifted with a soft crack, like peeling apart something that had been glued by fear. Behind it was a narrow cavity, just big enough for a man to hide what he didn't want found. Inside sat a leather book. Not a notebook. A real leather ledger, dark, swollen, salt-stained, stiff along the spine like it had spent years breathing ocean air. It felt heavier than paper should. When I opened it, the pages stuck together for a second, as if the book didn't want to be read. The first page was written in uneven block letters, unspoken rules of the sea. Underneath, in smaller handwriting if you're reading this, it means the sea has noticed you. You don't get to be new here for long. My throat tightened. I flipped through the pages and realized this wasn't some board keeper's ghost story. It wasn't superstition or folklore. It was a survival guide, half manual, half confession. Dates. Weather notes. Names crossed out. Whole paragraphs scratched through so hard the paper tore, like the writer couldn't stand to remember what he'd written. And the handwriting. It matched the old logbook I'd found, the one that looked like my own. Same angles, same rushed strokes, same habit of underlining certain words like they carried weight. I turned to the first rule. Rule 1, never let the light go dark. The light isn't for ships. It's a warning. Darkness tells them they're welcome. I read those lines 3 times, waiting for my brain to laugh. It didn't, because the tower had already shown me what darkness meant. Hear how the fog pressed closer. When the beam faltered, how the air turned colder. How something seemed to move when the lighthouse hesitated. The keeper's notes under Rule 1 were blunt and practical, like an electrician's checklist. Keep fuel ready. Test the generator every day. Keep a backup lantern within arm's reach. If the light flickers during fog, do not stand at the window and watch. Then, a sentence that made my stomach tighten, you will feel the urge to watch. That urge is not yours. I stared at that line until my eyes burned, because I'd felt it. The first time the beam hiccuped, my body had leaned toward the glass, without permission, like a hook in my ribs, pulling me forward. The consequence was written like a report. When the beam falters, the fog reacts. Not like weather, like a thing hearing its name. If the light dies completely, you will hear movement at the base of the tower. Scraping. Testing. Something learning the shape of your home. Do not go down. Do not shout. Do not pray out loud. Keep the light alive. I swallowed and listened. The tower groaned softly, metal settling, gears shifting. Or something heavier adjusting its weight where it shouldn't. Rule 2, if you see a ship with no running lights, do not signal. Some vessels aren't lost. They're hunting. Out here, ships are rare enough that any silhouette on the horizon feels like rescue. You see a shape and your chest loosens. Your mind reaches for the idea of other people like a life raft. The book warned that the sea uses that instinct against you. A ship without running lights isn't broken. It isn't stranded. It isn't asking for help. It's quiet on purpose. The keeper listed signs the way a man lists symptoms: no bow wave, no engine sound, no radio chatter, moves against the current, appears only when fog is thick enough to hide the waterline. Then, the part that made my skin tighten, if you signal it, it will answer. Not with light, by turning toward you. And it won't come like a ship comes. It will come like something being reeled in. I imagined a dark hull sliding without effort, as if the ocean itself was pulling it like bait, on a line drawing prey to the surface. The keeper wrote you will feel guilty ignoring it. You will imagine sailors freezing, stranded, dying out there. You may even hear crying that carries over the water. Do not signal. Those voices are part of the net. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my breathing quiet. Outside, Fog pressed against the glass. Inside, the book felt warm in my hands, as if it had been waiting for me to catch up. Rule 3: when the fog bell rings on its own, stay inside. The bell doesn't warn ships. It counts time before something reaches shore. I ran my thumb over the ink. It was darker here, as if the writer had pressed harder. When the bell rings by itself, the countdown begins. A long ring means it has entered the waterline. 2 short rings means it has found the rocks. If the bell goes silent after ringing, it is close enough to listen for you. Then, underline twice. If you go outside during the count, you will give it a shortcut. The instructions that followed weren't dramatic. They were ugly, simple survival steps. Lock the lower door. Bolt the interior latch. Close the curtains. Sit away from the windows. Do not look through cracks. Because looking is also a kind of invitation. I hated how logical it sounded. Like the bell wasn't a superstition at all, just a timer. A warning system built into the tower for something. The sea had done often enough that men learned to measure it. Rule 4: never look down into the water during a full fog. The sea reflects things that were never meant to have faces. This one made me angry. Because looking down is instinct. You hear movement below the rocks, and you want proof you aren't imagining it. You want your eyes to calm your mind. The keeper wrote in full fog, "The surface becomes a mirror that doesn't belong to the sky. It reflects what the fog is hiding. You will see something that resembles you. Not perfectly. Enough to make you doubt your own reflection. It will smile. It will move a fraction late, like a bad recording. And if you stare long enough, you will hear it speak inside your thoughts, using your own voice." I sat back, heart thudding slow and heavy. I thought of the wet handprints on the lens too high to be mine. I thought of the pale shape the beam had briefly revealed. Then the coldest sentence in the whole book: "The sea does not want you dead. It wants you replaced." Replaced. Not killed. Replaced. The word twisted in my stomach. Because replacement meant the sea wasn't just taking bodies. It was taking roles. Taking voices. Taking names. Taking a life and wearing it like a coat. Rule 5: if you hear footsteps on the stairs after midnight, do not answer. It already knows what your voice sounds like. Footsteps are one of the few sounds that can still trick you into comfort proof of another presence. Another human weight in the building. The book said. The lighthouse uses that comfort like bait. After midnight, you may hear steps climbing the spiral staircase. They will be slow. Human. Measured. They will pause at landings the way a tired man would. They will resume. Then they will stop outside your door. Do not speak. Do not clear your throat. Do not shift your weight. Because it is listening for confirmation. The keeper wrote the first time, it will use your name. The second time, it will use your voice. The third time, it won't ask. My mouth went dry. I remembered the voice from below the rocks, clean, close, patient. It never sounded like it was fighting distance. It sounded like it already knew the route to me. The book offered one defense: turn the radio to static. Not music. Not voices. Static. Because the sea hates noise it can't mimic. Static makes its copies imperfect. I stared at the radio on the counter, like it might turn itself on. Rule 6: if the light begins to rotate on its own, run. This rule was short, too short, like the writer had lost the luxury of explanation. You will notice it in your bones first. The rotation will feel wrong. The beam will sweep faster or slower than it should. Then it will do something worse, it will change direction. And when it does, it won't be searching the sea anymore. It will be searching you. I stared at that sentence until my vision blurred. The lighthouse was supposed to be the one constant. The one thing I controlled. The one tool between land and whatever moved in the fog. If the light turned against me, then I wasn't a keeper. I was prey trapped inside a machine. The final paragraph was written in jagged strokes, like the pen had been dragged across the page in a hurry. If the light turns on its own, do not try to fix it. Do not climb to the lens. Do not touch the gears. The moment you reach for the mechanism, you will feel a hand already there. Run downstairs. Run to the supply shed. Run to the emergency flare box. And if you see the beam pause on the window like it's staring back, do not stare into it. Because something on the other side is staring too. I shut the book and sat very still, listening to the tower breathe. Wind outside. A faint hum from the generator. The soft, steady tick of the rotation gears. Normal. Almost. Then the fog bell rang. One long ring exactly like the book described. And when the sound faded, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt attentive. Like the ocean had leaned closer to the rock to hear what I would do next. I held the book tighter, like leather and paper could protect me. And in that moment, the rules stopped being words. They became a map. A map of what the sea could do, and what it had already done to the man before me. Because one detail kept flashing in my mind. The boots by the door, still lined up neatly, toes facing the ocean. Not lined up like they were left behind. Lined up like someone had stepped out of them and walked into the fog barefoot. I broke Rule 2 on the 9th night. I didn't do it because I was brave. I did it because I was tired. Tired of the fog. Tired of the bell. Tired of hearing my name spoken from below the rocks, like it belonged to someone else. Tired of living inside a tower that felt more like a locked room than a job. And most of all, tired of being alone. That night the fog came early again, rolling up the rock like smoke sucked through a crack. The beam swept its usual path, slow and steady, carving pale slices through the gray. I logged the weather like I always did. I checked the generator. I cleaned the lens with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Then I saw it. A shape on the horizon. At first it was just a darker smudge inside the fog, easy to mistake for shadow. But it held its line. It grew wider, closer. A hull, long and low, sliding across water I couldn't even see. No running lights. No mast light. No radio signal. Just a black silhouette moving with the confidence of something that knew exactly where it was going. Rule 2 flashed in my mind like a warning label. If you see a ship with no running lights, do not signal. Some vessels aren't lost. They're hunting. I stared at it and tried to do the smart thing. I tried to look away. But the longer I watched, the more my chest tightened with a stupid, human kind of hope. A ship meant people, voices, proof that the world outside the fog still existed, proof that I hadn't been forgotten out here. The book said you might hear crying. I didn't hear crying. I heard something worse. I heard my name again, quiet, patient, carried through the fog like a whisper threaded into the wind. Thomas. And then, faintly, a second voice. Not my name. Not words. Just the sound of someone breathing like they were cold. It came from the direction of the ship. I stood there, staring at the silhouette, feeling my hands hover near the signal lamp, mounted by the window. I told myself the ship might be damaged. I told myself it might be drifting into the rocks. I told myself I could flash a warning and save lives. I told myself a lie that sounded like morality. My fingers wrapped around the switch. One short signal. Standard. Safe. Just enough to say I see you. The lamp blinked, and the fog moved. Not swirling, not shifting in the wind. It leaned. Like the mist itself had turned its head. The ship responded immediately. Not with a light. With motion. The dark hull pivoted, slow at first, then smoother, turning toward the lighthouse with a certainty that made my stomach drop. No bow wave. No churn. It glided like it wasn't pushing through water at all. Like something under the surface was pulling it on a line. I snapped the lamp off, heart hammering. Too late. The ship was already coming. The beam swept across it, and for a split second, the fog thinned enough to show details that shouldn't exist. The deck looked wrong, too clean, too empty. No figures. No ropes. No movement. The windows were black holes. Then the beam moved on, and the ship vanished back into gray. The fog bell rang on its own. One long ring. The countdown. I backed away from the window and locked the lower door with shaking hands. I bolted the latch. I closed the curtains like the book said. Then I heard it. A sound at the base of the tower. Not a wave. Not stone settling. Scraping. Slow, careful scraping like nails testing the edge of a doorframe. My breath turned thin. I pressed my palm over my mouth to keep from making noise. Another scrape. Then another. Something was moving along the rock, feeling its way upward. I told myself it was the ship's anchor chain. I told myself it was driftwood. I told myself anything but the truth. The scraping stopped. Silence pressed in. Then the footsteps began. On the stairs. Not running. Not heavy. Measured steps, one at a time, as if a man was climbing carefully in the dark. The spiral staircase carried the sound perfectly, bouncing it up through the tower. Step. 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 I froze. Rule 5 burned in my head. If you hear footsteps on the stairs after midnight, do not answer. The steps paused at the first landing, just like a tired person would. Then they continued. Step. 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 The tower felt smaller with every footfall. I reached for the radio with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking, and turned the dial until it filled the room with static. Harsh, useless noise. The footsteps stopped for a moment, like whatever was climbing had listened. Then they resumed faster. I backed away from the door, eyes locked on the knob like it might turn. The beam swept past the window. And I realized something that made my blood go cold. The light wasn't moving the way it should. The rotation felt wrong. Not a mechanical hitch, something deeper. Something like a heartbeat changing rhythm. The beam came around again sooner than it should have. Faster. Then it paused. Right on my window. As if the lighthouse was staring back at me. I remembered Rule 6, if the light begins to rotate on its own run. Before I could move, the beam shifted. The rotation reversed. the light began turning the wrong way. A slow, deliberate reversal, like a hand had reached into the mechanism and twisted it. The tower groaned, not like metal settling, but like something inside protesting. The static on the radio sputtered, and through the hiss I heard my voice. Not a recording, not an echo. My own voice, perfectly shaped, perfectly calm, speaking from inside the noise. Thomas, open the door. My knees almost gave out. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, while the beam continued to sweep the room in the wrong direction, searching, pausing, searching again. Then the glass above the lens platform creaked. A wet sound slid across it, like a palm dragging. I looked up without thinking, and I saw it through the fogged glass. A silhouette, pressed close from the outside, tall and narrow, limbs too long, posture wrong. It didn't cling like an animal. It held itself upright, as if it had learned to imitate men, but never learned the rules of bone. Water streamed off it in thin lines. Its head tilted slightly, curious. And even through the glass, I could feel it listening. The beam swept over its shape, and the fog thinned just enough to show a pale surface skin like drowned paper, stretched tight. No clear features, just hints. A suggestion of a face that didn't fully belong to any species I knew. Then the beam moved on. And the thing moved with it, keeping pace, staying in the blind spot of the light, like it understood the tower better than I did. I ran down the stairs, not caring how loud my boots were now. The static screamed behind me. The fog bell rang again, 2 short rings this time, sharp and urgent. It had found the rocks. I hit the lower landing, grabbed the emergency flare box, and yanked it open with shaking hands. My fingers slipped on the metal. Everything felt slick, like the air itself was sweating. Above me, the footsteps changed. They weren't steps anymore. They were dragging, clicking. Too many points of contact. A wet scrape down the inner wall of the staircase. Something was coming down wrong. I didn't wait to see it. I grabbed a flare, struck it, and a harsh red light exploded into the room, hot, alive, human-made. For the first time that night, the fog outside recoiled. I saw it through the crack under the door, thinning back as if it didn't like the color. But the lighthouse beam, my beam, kept rotating backward, sweeping toward the door again and again, like it wanted to cancel the flare's protection. The tower groaned. The knob on the lower door twitched once, gently, like someone testing if it was locked. Then came the voice. Right outside, close enough to feel in my teeth. My voice again. Soft, patient. Thomas, you invited us. The fog bell went silent. That meant it was close enough to listen. And in the sudden quiet, I heard the ocean make a sound that wasn't a wave. A low, satisfied exhale. Like something huge had settled beneath the rock and was waiting for the light to fail. I survived because the flare bought me seconds. Seconds are everything when you're dealing with something that measures time differently than humans do. The red light filled the lower landing, hot and furious. And for a moment, the tower felt like it belonged to me again. I kept the flare raised like a weapon, even though I knew it wasn't a weapon, just a distraction. A human color. A human fire. Something the fog didn't want to touch. The handle on the door stopped twitching. Outside, my voice went quiet. And in that silence, I realized the lighthouse beam was still rotating backward, still hunting the inside of the tower, like it had decided I was the thing that needed to be found. I did the only smart thing left. I ran. I grabbed the emergency radio from the wall and the old duffel I kept packed, just in case. I didn't stop to collect the logbooks. I didn't stop to shut off the generator. I didn't stop to look back upstairs, because I could feel eyes in the glass. Gleek. The fog outside had thinned a little, like it was holding itself back. Patient. Certain I'd make a mistake. I unlocked the lower door and stepped out onto the rock path with the flare spitting sparks above my head. The air hit me like ice water. The metallic smell was so strong it felt like I was breathing a mouthful of pennies. Down by the waterline, something shifted. Not a splash. Not a wave. A slow movement beneath, the surface too large, too smooth, circling the base of the rock. And then I saw the ship again. Close now, half hidden by fog, sliding in without sound. No lights. No wake. Just that black hull like a mouth drifting toward shore. I didn't wait for it to dock. I aimed the flare toward the sea and watched the red light stain the fog. The mist recoiled in thin sheets, peeling back just enough to show a pale vertical shape near the rocks, tall and narrow, standing where no man could stand without falling. Its head tilted, like it was curious how far I would go. Then, from the tower above me, the beam paused. Right on me. As if the lighthouse had turned its face to watch me leave. I felt a sick certainty settle in my gut. I hadn't escaped because I was faster. I'd been allowed to leave. Allowed because it wanted to see where I would go next. I ran anyway. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs shook, climbing over wet rock, following the narrow emergency trail that led to the helipad. My hands were numb by the time I reached the rusted flare box at the edge of the platform. I fired the distress signal. Twice. The second shot barely cleared the fog. Then I waited, crouched against the ground, listening to the tower behind me groan and click like a machine changing its mind. I never heard footsteps on the stairs again. I heard something worse. A soft, wet sound like a palm sliding along glass. Then silence. A full hour passed before the helicopter lights cut through the fog like two small moons. When the skids touched down, the pilot didn't ask questions. He didn't even look at the lighthouse. He kept his eyes on me, on my hands shaking, on the flare burns on my sleeve. As soon as we lifted, the fog swallowed the tower. The last thing I saw was the beam sweeping the gray, still rotating backward, still searching. I tried to tell the authorities the truth. They wrote stress reaction in the report. They said I was dehydrated, sleep-deprived, hallucinating. They nodded like men do when they've already decided you're a problem they can file away. They replaced me within a week. New keeper, fresh paint. A boat crew went out and inspected the site. They called it routine maintenance. They said the bell mechanism needed repair. They said the lighthouse was being upgraded, more automated, less dependent on a single man. They asked me to sign a form saying I'd left voluntarily. I signed because I wanted to pretend the sea couldn't follow me. Once I stepped off that rock, I moved inland. I took a job that kept me under fluorescent lights and surrounded by people. I stopped going near the coast. I stopped eating seafood. I stopped listening to weather reports because the word fog felt like a threat. For a while, it worked. Then the dreams started. I'd wake up with the taste of metal in my mouth, hearing my name spoken patiently from someplace below my bed. Not shouted. Not urgent. Patient. Like something waiting for me to answer. And last night, months later, driving along the coast on a road I swore I would never take again, I saw it. The lighthouse. On the far edge of the water, barely visible. They say it's automated now. But the beam swept the sea like it always had. And then it paused. Right there, on the stretch of road where my car moved through the dark. Like it recognized me. I kept driving. I didn't look back. Because I remembered the first line in that leather book, if the sea has noticed you, you don't get to be new for long. And somewhere behind me, in the distance, the fog bell rang, once long low, like it was starting the countdown. All over again.